today's video, I'm going to be having a look at what's gone on with Elon Musk's tweet and some of the stock price rises. We're also going to be looking at EVs, Trump's impeachment, and a little bit on some of the tech companies and high-profile flyers that have been winning throughout the year. Hello and welcome to another acysecurities daily report video. My name is Alistair Schultz and I'm going to be your host through today's trading journey. The first thing I'm looking at today is a little bit of a comedic factor, at least it is for me, and I'm sure you guys will have a bit of a chuckle at it as well. Effectively, Elon Musk put out a tweet there yesterday morning, I'm sure you guys have already heard about it, saying to use Signal in response to some of the Twitter bans that have been going on with Donald Trump, and of course, him looking for an alternative platform to Parler. Elon did say use Signal, and that was fine. Unfortunately, for one company, a lot of investors went online, had a look, and went, yep, we're going to purchase into this one. It's called Signal Advance. Now, most people would be mistaken when they think about it. Obviously, it's immediately obvious that if you say, he says use Signal, you've got Signal Advance as a company, perhaps it's that. But it's actually Signal Technologies that they should have been investing in. Signal Advance happens to be a medical company that hasn't really had revenue since about 2016. So, what did we see happen? We saw their stock price jump 885%. The company's valuation jumped 11,000% and a bit more. They went from a market cap of $6 million to $300 million in a single day, and then eventually it has come back down when people realized the mistake. They had an absolute high on their stock price of $70.85, all the way down from sub $1. So this has been one of those happy mistakes that have happened. Of course, if you're already holding Signal, saw those jump outs, you'd probably consider retiring about now. And of course, you know, the CEO of the company has thought it's been a little bit humorous and sort of not been real happy about the end result. But at the end of the day, he was still looking at it and saying, well, people need to really check their ticker prices. It is important to make sure if you do take advice like this from someone like Elon Musk, or you are looking at a thing, make sure you're looking at the right stock. Make sure the ticker signal matches up and do your own research. Don't just rely on what someone else says. Don't even rely on what I say. Do your own research and make sure you understand all the metrics of that company before you consider it. Now, moving on from a little bit of this comedic sort of side of things where we've had an accidental mistake building a company into a $300 million enterprise, we're looking at what's going on with tech companies and of course what's happening around this whole tweet fiasco and Twitter fiasco with Donald Trump. Now, I have put a blog post out about this, so feel free to check that out as well. But effectively, we're looking at a pretty interesting circle of events that are likely to happen over 2021. To start it all off, I'll recap it for you a little bit. We had Donald Trump banned from Twitter. The reason he was banned from Twitter in the first place was he was considered to have been inciting riots or violence. Now, whether that goes against the terms and conditions of Twitter or not, there is a certain level of freedom of speech that needs to be mandated. Now, when it comes to that, it's a basic human right, the freedom of speech. And of course, lawmakers have seen the cash down on Donald Trump for Twitter, for Facebook, for Instagram, for TikTok, and a variety of other social media industries and companies by basically going, you guys shouldn't be the ones making the rulings on what is considered to be socially acceptable for one thing, but also whether or not it is freedom of speech. And if you are restricting someone's freedom of speech, they see a problem with that. So lawmakers, not even people that aren't uncommon names. We've heard of from Angela Merkel and quite a few European lawmakers who have said that they believe that the lawmakers should be the ones that are actually putting the rules in place around that. So interestingly enough, we've then seen a little bit more action happen, and that's come from Amazon and Google and Apple and all of the App Store sort of variations. And that's because there was some talk and looking at about going towards another app called Parler, which the Trump campaign has an account with, but they immediately, Google, Amazon, and Apple all pulled it from the servers and or app stores respectively, so that there couldn't be new users after an influx came through almost immediately after the Trump Twitter ban. So with all of that happening, and considering most of these companies were involved in the hearings not too long ago for anti-competition practices, there's likely going to be a lot more attention on them about how they operate. When we had the anti-competition practices, people were really looking at the idea and wondering and questioning, should they be broken up on these companies? Should there be other rules in place to stop them? And are they using all the power and the might that they actually have from a wealth advantage to be able to control and dominate markets? Now, in that competitive side, when it comes to a new entrance that might become competition or existing competition, quite often get beaten down. And there were several examples of this occurring in most of the companies available. Now, when we see what's going on now, you would think maybe it's a good time to lie low. Nope, let's go and jump into the political agenda and restrict someone's freedom of speech. Most of you would know I don't really get onto the political side of things, but this isn't a political argument. This is really about the freedom of speech and how much power should be given to a company. Now that they're actually able to restrict someone's speech, whether it be Trump or someone else, really doesn't really matter. The fact is that person is still a human being and is allowed to and entitled to their own opinion. So that is the issue that the lawmakers are seeing as well. I wouldn't be surprised if at some stage this year, if not even in the very short period of time upcoming, we will likely find that these companies end up in another hearing and there will be potentially some regulation put on them. But considering what we saw last year with the anti-competition hearings, there was discussion about breaking these companies up. So in the sense that if we have all of Google, then breaking up YouTube into a separate element, the Google side, and then the Alphabet research arm separately, and have them all in different areas or as their own standalone entities. That's not a bad thing for investors. It means that we might see stock prices come down in those companies and we have more to choose from. So instead of just having Google to go into, now we can actually purchase into YouTube and the separate divisions that Google holds or the ones that Facebook holds. So that could very well be a possibility. It doesn't mean it's all going to happen overnight, but that is certainly on my agenda and watch list. The other potential is that they get regulated. Naturally, when we look at how social medias have been behaving recently, they've started to take more of that book approach, where they are actually going and restricting who can and can't say what. Now, whether they should be allowed to do that, that's kind of operating a little bit like a publisher. So to a degree, that might mean that there needs to be more regulation put in, or at least the lawmakers may find out or feel that they should be having more jurisdiction and more control over the rules for some of these companies that are actually breaking or bending some of them, if you will. Now, moving on from the anti-competition side of things, we do have a little bit on EVs today. Now, the EV appetite is obviously growing. We've seen it growing for quite some time already, and particularly when we think about things like Tesla, who are obviously at the forefront of all of this, they are really growing with a lot of anticipation. And we want to see great things for all of these companies. It's good for the environment, it's good for us. Of course, there are some downsides on everything, but regardless of that, it seems to be the way and the trend that people are starting to like. And now we're starting to see a little bit of follow-up. A part of it is GM. GM has just announced they're going to be creating a whole lot of new cars. And since when they had their bankruptcy event and the relisting back then, they've actually reached their all-time high since their initial bankruptcy filing. So they've now reached $47.82 at the notice that they're actually going to be producing more than 20 different electric vehicles over the next couple of years. That's all really nice news, but it goes further than that. Just because GM's done it, we obviously heard of other companies that are around the globe like NEIO, and of course, looking at what we've seen on the opposite side with Nikola. Nikola didn't go so well. And so I suppose I do have a little bit of concern on those sort of fronts when it comes to some of these companies. But regardless, special acquisition companies, or SPACs for short, are on the rampage for deals at the moment. They're really looking for all of these little companies like Nikola, or ones that are making EVs or might have some sort of an innovative product, and they're absorbing them and taking them public on a regular basis. So we are seeing a lot for it. It's not the only way that we're seeing a lot of public listings starting to come up and a lot of deals occurring. There's a lot of push coming from the Joe Biden administration. So when he does eventually become president, we're likely going to be seeing a lot of green movement, which is good for EVs as well. And we've got a lot of push coming out of Australia with lithium because it's one of the best places to get it. Now, the question really remains, which one of these companies is going to be like Tesla, or at least compete with Tesla? And so that's really what we've got to be looking at now. I don't think we can do this lightly. It is a case of, perhaps you could diversify yourself and spread across the whole lot when it comes to money, but that wouldn't be the best way to go. So do a little bit of research. Find the ones that you actually like And perhaps this might be an opportunity for you to get into something as an early phase or startup, or maybe once it first gets publicly listed, have a look at some of those SPACs that are already on the public listing who are purchasing into them. And you might find that you get early access to an electric vehicle manufacturer who is going to get some good growth and potentially become the next Tesla. So that's one side of things to look at when it comes to the EV side. Obviously, it's good for the ESG and the environmental side of things. So it's not a bad way to have a look in the future, but particularly if you want to get some of that exposure. Now, looking forward to what's happening with impeachment on Trump. I've been doing a little bit of research. We have had a lot of talk and discussion about it, so I thought it might not be a bad idea. Now, whilst this might not be totally related to everything that's going on in financial markets, it certainly does impact the US situation a little bit. Because when we think about the political front of what happens in the US, it's been in the limelight, it's been in the media, it has all of our attention right now, and is likely to be like that for quite some time, because a lot of the politics in the US affect the financial side of things as well. It only takes a small moment to have a look at how the Fed and the fiscal policy has affected the S&P 500 and the NASDAQ to really see that it does actually play a big part. So when it comes to impeachment, there's not actually been that many presidents that have been impeached. There's 3. And of those 3, they haven't really gotten all the way through. We've had President Johnson, President Clinton, and President Trump all have impeachment proceedings pushed against them. There have been much more proceedings. There's been 60 different proceedings in total, but they include senators and Supreme Court justice judges. So there is a little bit of variation on that, and they obviously haven't all gone through. Not all 60 have been successful, as we've seen with Trump, who successfully beat it back at the beginning of last year. So now, what's actually required for an impeachment process? We're obviously seeing Nancy Pelosi push quite hard, and she's trying to give ultimatums now to Vice President Pence. So now we're looking at what is the scenario. Basically, you need 2/3 of a majority in the Senate to actually get this passed through, in which case that would be the 25th Amendment enacted. The other option they have is to vote to disqualify, meaning that they don't impeach him, he still gets his benefits perhaps as being post-president, but he won't be able to run again. And similarly to that, the 14th Amendment, which hasn't been used since the Civil War, is on the Insurrection Act against the United States. Now, there is a memorandum in there that allows them to basically get him again disqualified from being able to re-serve as president or to even rerun, but it doesn't mean he loses his benefits in that scenario. Now, if impeached, he does lose his post-presidency benefits. That means that he won't get the income, he won't get the other advantages, but he's still entitled to Secret Service agents to make sure they protect him. Now, with all of that happening, we still have to ask the question, if there's only a few days to go, does it really all that matter that much? Well, the fact of the reality is this is a tactical play, like I said yesterday. It's all about preventing Trump from trying to rerun in 2024, as opposed to actually just trying to be spiteful about it. So there is a little bit more to it. It is a political play, not anything else to it. I know it looks a little bit different, but that's the way it actually is. So moving on from that, does it make a big effect when it comes to this year's politics and how things are going to move? I don't think it will. Once we get into the Biden administration and they are starting to go, that first 100 days, we'll probably see a little bit of lackluster movements for markets, but then after that, it should start ramping up. On average, you do get growth, more growth in the second and third term of a president's run, so in the second year and the third year, than what you do in the first and the fourth. So bear that in mind for this year when it comes to US equities. Now, looking at some of the news ahead of today, we have a little bit on, most of it is low impact, but we do have a couple of things in there that I think are actually worth everyone keeping an eye on, particularly with some of the Fed announcements that are going to be out later this week. The first one is German WPI. Now, we are going to be watching that. It's obviously a European thing, but shortly after that, we're going to be hearing from ECB President Christine Lagarde, and that'll be later tonight. And we also have industrial production figures for the Euro area as well as Italy. So if you are trading the Euro tonight during that London session, it might not be a bad idea to keep watchful eye on your calendar for these. Outside of that, when we move into the US session tonight, and the reason I have a little bit of focus here on the US is because we're going to be hearing from the FOMC members. We've been hearing from them all week. We're going to be hearing from Fed Brainard as well a bit later in the evening. The big one to look at here is the consumer price inflation, both the core and the full. Now, the reason for looking at these is going to be that we've heard about the Treasury movements the dollar valuation as well. And there's been some talk about tapering back on the asset purchase program, or the purchase of bonds. Now, I don't think they're going to do it. We've heard from 2 FOMC members who have sort of pushed back and said, no, that's not happening. But regardless, there's still speculation that it could happen. And sometimes you do get a little bit of a surprise when it comes to the Fed with things like this. They will say, no, we're not doing it. But you've only heard from 2 members. And then what do you know, the next week when they all vote, they're the only 2 members that voted against it whilst everyone else went for it. So let's keep an eye on that situation. It's going to be interesting. They're going to be tracking what happens very closely with inflation at the moment, purely because they want to keep a good close eye on it for what's happening with the bond yields and where interest rates could go to if they have to implement them. And of course, they're going to be tracking the inflation more specifically to make sure it doesn't ramp up or creep up too quickly. Now, that's all there is for today's video. If you do have any questions, please feel free to hit me up on any of my socials. I will happily answer questions if you send them to me. And of course, don't forget to like and subscribe to this video so you can get more great content from me and ACY Securities in the future. Have a great trading day ahead.